The night my own son slid eviction papers across the dinner table, I felt something inside me shatter forever. No warning, no apology, just cold legal words telling me I had 45 days to leave the home I built with my entire life. I remember staring at his face, searching for the boy I raised, and realizing he was gone. In his place stood someone who saw me as an obstacle, not a mother. That was the moment I understood that love alone would not protect me anymore, and that was when I decided I would never let anyone erase my worth again. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I am 64 years old. I have lived in Savannah, Georgia, for most of my life, in a small wooden house by the river that once felt like the safest place in the world. When I look back now, it is hard to believe how peaceful my life once seemed, how certain I was that I had already survived the worst and earned the right to grow old in quiet dignity. I lost my husband, Thomas, when our son Ryan was only 15. It happened on a rainy evening when a speeding truck ran a red light and shattered our world in a single moment. I still remember sitting in the cold hospital hallway, holding my purse in both hands, listening to a doctor explain things I barely understood. In 1 hour, I went from being a wife and a partner to being a widow and a single mother. After that night, everything changed. I returned to work as a nurse almost immediately because I had no other choice. I worked double shifts, night shifts, weekends, and holidays. I learned how to function on 3 hours of sleep. I learned how to smile for patients even when my own heart was breaking. During the day, I helped Ryan with homework. At night, I washed uniforms and packed lunches. I did not complain because I believed that sacrifice was part of love. Every dollar mattered. I skipped vacations, new clothes, and small pleasures. I saved for Ryan's college fund before I ever thought about myself. When he took his entrance exams, I waited outside the testing center for hours, praying quietly in my car. When he was accepted, I cried in the parking lot, overwhelmed with pride. I truly believed that all my struggles had been worth it. Years later, with the insurance money from Thomas and decades of savings, I bought a modest house near the Savannah River. It had a wide porch, creaking wooden floors, and sunlight that poured through the windows in the mornings. I planted roses in the yard and herbs by the kitchen door. That house became my sanctuary. It was where I healed, where I learned to live again. When Ryan married Madeline, they struggled financially at first. Without hesitation, I invited them to live with me. Later, when Ryan needed a loan to start his real estate business, I agreed to put his name on the house. He held my hands and promised, "Mom, this is just paperwork." I believed him without question. Why would I not? He was my son. I had raised him with honesty, kindness, and responsibility. I trusted him more than I trusted myself. Before everything fell apart, my days were simple. I cooked dinner, I cleaned, I watered my plants, I listened to Ryan talk about work, and nodded politely when Madeline discussed her online projects. I never asked for much. I thought I was content. Sometimes, in the evenings, I sat on the porch and watched the river move slowly past, thinking about how far I had come. I believed I was finally safe. I believed my home, my family, and my sacrifices were secure. I did not realize that the foundations of my life were already cracking. I did not know that the people I trusted most were quietly drifting away from me. And I certainly did not know that soon I would be forced to fight for the very place I had spent my entire life building. If you're still watching and starting to feel how much I sacrificed for my family, please comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Because what happened next completely changed everything. Now, let's move on to chapter 2. After Ryan married Madeline, something in our home began to shift, slowly and quietly, like a river changing its course without anyone noticing. At first, I told myself it was normal. Every young couple needs space. Every son grows away from his mother eventually. I repeated those thoughts so often that they started to feel like truth, even when my heart whispered otherwise. Ryan used to sit with me in the evenings, telling me about his day, his clients, his plans. We shared coffee on the porch and talked about everything from work to memories of his father. After the wedding, those moments disappeared. He started coming home later. When I asked how his day was, he answered with a few short words before disappearing into his room. His phone seemed more important than any conversation with me. Madeline, on the other hand, filled every space in the house with her presence. She turned our living room into a filming studio without asking. Bright lights, tripods, and cameras appeared overnight. She recorded herself cooking in my kitchen, dancing in the hallway, and posing by my front window. My home became a backdrop for her online life. Sometimes, I would walk into a room and realize I was being filmed without my consent. When I expressed discomfort, she laughed it off and said it was just content. Slowly, I began to feel invisible. Decisions were made without me. Furniture was rearranged. Decorations were replaced. Even my favorite chair by the window was moved to make space for better lighting. I stopped recognizing my own living room. Yet, I said nothing. I convinced myself that keeping peace was more important than speaking up. Once, I gently suggested that maybe we should talk before making big changes. Ryan sighed and told me I was being too sensitive. He said Madeline knew what she was doing. That sentence stayed with me longer than he realized. It was the first time my own son made me feel like an outsider in my own home. Family dinners became quiet. We sat at the same table, but our minds were in different places. Ryan scrolled through emails. Madeline checked her follower count. I watched them and wondered when laughter had left our kitchen. The warmth I once felt there slowly faded into polite silence. Despite everything, I still hoped things would improve. I believed love could fix distance. I believed patience could heal misunderstanding. I did not want to accept that I might be losing my place in my son's life. A few days before New Year's Eve, Ryan told me he was planning a special family dinner. His voice sounded formal, almost rehearsed. Still, I felt a spark of excitement. Maybe he wanted to reconnect. Maybe this was his way of saying he still cared. I threw myself into the preparation. I cleaned every corner of the house. I polished the dining table. I planned a menu that reminded me of the holidays when Ryan was young. I wanted everything to be perfect, as if perfection could bring us back to what we used to be. Yet, beneath my excitement, a strange unease grew. Madeline avoided my eyes. Ryan seemed tense. Conversations ended quickly. Sometimes I caught them whispering when they thought I was not listening. My chest tightened with questions I was too afraid to ask. On the afternoon of New Year's Eve, as I set the table, my hands trembled slightly. I did not know why. I told myself it was just nerves. I chose optimism over instinct. I chose hope over reality. Looking back, I realized that night was not meant to bring us closer. It was meant to tear everything apart. If you're still watching and noticing the warning signs I ignored, please comment number 2 below to let me know you're with me. The next moment was the one that broke my heart forever. Now, let's move on to chapter 3. New Year's Eve arrived wrapped in quiet tension. Outside, the streets of Savannah glowed with soft holiday lights, and distant laughter drifted in from neighboring houses. Inside our home, everything looked perfect on the surface. The dining table was set with polished silverware and folded napkins. Candles flickered gently, casting warm shadows on the walls. I had cooked all afternoon, determined to make this night feel special, as if effort alone could restore what had been slipping away. Ryan and Madeline sat across from me, their faces calm but distant. I tried to fill the silence with small talk, asking about work, plans, and friends. Their answers were brief, polite, and empty. Each response felt like a closed door. I focused on my plate, pretending not to notice how disconnected we had become. Halfway through the meal, Ryan suddenly reached into his jacket pocket. His movements were stiff, almost mechanical. He pulled out a thin manila envelope and placed it carefully on the table, sliding it toward me without meeting my eyes. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed louder than usual. I stared at the envelope, unsure why my hands felt so heavy. Slowly, I picked it up and opened it. Inside were several printed pages filled with formal language and legal terms. I read the first line, then the second, then the third. My breath caught in my throat. It was a notice requesting that I vacate the property within 45 days. My vision blurred as I read it again, hoping I had misunderstood. But the words did not change. They stayed cold and precise, leaving no room for interpretation. This was not a mistake. It was deliberate. I looked up and saw Madeline watching me closely. Her lips were pressed together in what looked like a controlled smile. Her phone rested near her hand, angled slightly toward me. In that moment, I realized she was recording. My humiliation was becoming her content. My chest tightened. Memories rushed through me. Ryan learning to ride a bike in this driveway, birthday parties in this dining room, late nights comforting him after nightmares. Every memory was tied to these walls. And now, I was being told to leave. I managed to ask, quietly, why this was happening. Ryan cleared his throat and said they wanted to sell the house and move to Atlanta. He spoke as if he were discussing a business transaction, not uprooting his mother. He said they needed a fresh start. There was no apology in his voice, no hesitation, only distance. I waited for emotion to rise in me. Anger, panic, desperation. Instead, a strange calm settled over my body. It was as if my mind shut down to protect itself. I picked up my fork and continued eating. The food tasted like nothing. I chewed slowly, focusing on small movements to keep myself grounded. I did not cry. I did not argue. I refused to give them the reaction they seemed to expect. When dinner ended, I stood up and cleared the plates. I washed every dish by hand, listening to the water run and watching steam rise from the sink. No one offered to help. The kitchen felt colder than usual. Later, I carried the envelope to my bedroom. I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of my bed, holding those papers in my lap. For the first time that night, my hands began to shake. I was being pushed out of the life I had built. And I knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same again. If you're still watching and felt the shock of that dinner table moment, please comment number 3 below to let me know you're with me, because what I discovered that night would change everything. Now, let's move on to chapter 4. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time after closing the door, listening to the distant sounds of fireworks drifting through the night. Laughter and music echoed faintly from somewhere down the street, reminding me that the rest of the world was celebrating while mine was quietly falling apart. The envelope lay in my lap, heavy as if it were filled with stones instead of paper. Slowly, I opened it again. I forced myself to read every page carefully this time. The words were cold, formal, and unforgiving. They spoke of ownership, sales agreements, and legal timelines. There was no room for emotion in those documents, no space for memories, sacrifices, or love. According to those pages, I was simply an occupant who needed to leave. The realization burned. They had planned this. It had not been a sudden decision made over dinner. It had been prepared in advance, discussed in private, and finalized without my knowledge. I felt foolish for not seeing it sooner, for trusting so completely. My thoughts drifted back to the day I signed the paperwork to put Ryan's name on the house. We had sat at this same dining table, sunlight pouring through the windows. He had smiled and told me it was only for business purposes, that it would help him secure better loans. I had barely glanced at the pages. I had trusted my son more than any contract. That trust now felt like a mistake I could never undo. I reached for my laptop and placed it on the bed. My hands were still trembling, but I pushed through it. I logged into my old email accounts and financial folders, searching for anything related to our shared accounts and past agreements. Over the years, I had kept copies of important documents out of habit. That habit was about to save me. One by one, I opened files. Loan agreements, bank statements, investment summaries, trust fund records. At first, everything looked normal. Then I noticed numbers that did not belong. Transfers I did not remember approving, loans I had never discussed, dates that did not match any conversation I recalled. My stomach tightened as I examined the digital signatures attached to several documents. They looked like mine, but they were not. The curves were wrong. The spacing was slightly off. Anyone who had seen me sign my name for decades would know the difference. Someone had copied my signature and used it without permission. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might wake the entire house. For several minutes, I simply stared at the screen, frozen between disbelief and rage. Part of me wanted to run downstairs and demand answers. Another part wanted to collapse into tears. Instead, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Something inside me shifted. The helplessness faded. The panic softened. In its place came clarity. I remembered something Thomas once told me after a difficult day at work. He said that strength was not about never falling. It was about standing back up when the ground tried to swallow you. I had fallen. Now it was time to rise. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the small desk by my window. Outside, the river reflected the moonlight, calm and steady. I opened a notebook and began writing everything down. Dates, amounts, account numbers, questions, plans. Hour after hour passed. I did not sleep. By the time the sky began to lighten, I was no longer confused or afraid. I was focused. I knew exactly what I needed to do. For the first time since that envelope appeared on the table, I felt something close to power. If you're still watching and wondering what I decided to do after uncovering the truth, please comment number 4 below to let me know you're with me. My next move stunned everyone. Now let's move on to chapter 5. Morning arrived without ceremony. The pale light slipped through my bedroom curtains and settled quietly on the floor, as if unsure whether it was welcome. I had not slept at all. My body felt heavy, my eyes burned, and my hands trembled slightly as I held my coffee mug. Yet my mind was sharper than it had been in years. Fear had been replaced by determination. I sat at my desk and opened my notebook. Every detail I had written during the night stared back at me. Account numbers, loan dates, question marks beside suspicious transactions. It was no longer just a feeling of betrayal. It was evidence. My first call was to a local law office recommended by a former colleague. The receptionist's calm voice grounded me as I explained my situation. Within minutes, I had an emergency appointment scheduled. The attorney listened carefully, reviewed my documents, and confirmed what I already suspected. My signature had likely been forged. My rights had been violated. I was not powerless. Hearing that felt like oxygen returning to my lungs. Next, I contacted my primary bank. The process was slow and exhausting. I answered security questions, verified personal details, and explained the situation again and again. I reported the unauthorized transactions and requested immediate protective measures. The representative assured me that temporary holds would be placed on all affected accounts. When the confirmation email arrived, I stared at it for several seconds, barely believing it was real. One by one, I began to dismantle every financial bridge that connected me to Ryan's business. I sent formal requests to cancel my role as guarantor on his company loans. I closed our joint checking account. I withdrew authorization from shared credit services. Each action felt like cutting a thread that had once represented trust. With every click and signature, that trust unraveled further. The trust fund was next. I contacted the investment management firm that had overseen it for years. After verifying my identity, I requested an immediate freeze. I updated beneficiary information and removed Ryan's access. The advisor hesitated briefly, likely sensing the emotional weight behind my request, but she complied. When she confirmed the changes, I felt both relief and grief at the same time. Then came security. I changed every password I could remember: email accounts, banking platforms, investment portals, utility services. I activated two-factor authentication on everything. I replaced old security questions with answers no one could guess. It felt paranoid, but I refused to be careless again. Throughout the morning, my hands shook, not from weakness, but from the effort of holding myself together. There were moments when doubt crept in. I wondered if I was being too harsh, if I was destroying my relationship with my son beyond repair, if a good mother would hesitate. Then I remembered the envelope. I remembered the camera pointed at my face. I remembered how easily they had decided I was expendable. By early afternoon, my inbox was full of confirmation messages. Holds had been placed, accounts secured, access revoked, policies updated. Nothing had been overlooked. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For the first time since New Year's Eve, I could breathe. I carried my coffee to the porch and sat facing the river. The water moved steadily, indifferent to human drama. The sky was clear. Birds circled overhead. Life, somehow, continued. My phone buzzed, then buzzed again. And again. Missed calls, voicemails, messages. I did not open any of them. Not yet. I knew what they meant. The storm had reached my son, and soon he would come looking for me. My phone did not stop vibrating that afternoon. It buzzed on the kitchen counter, on the living room table, beside my bed. Calls, messages, missed notifications stacked up faster than I could read them. I recognized Ryan's number immediately. I also saw unfamiliar numbers, likely from banks, partners, or people trying to reach him. I ignored them all. I needed silence before I could face what was coming. Around sunset, I heard the front door open with force. Footsteps rushed across the hallway. A moment later, Ryan stood in the doorway of the living room, breathing hard. His hair was messy. His jacket was half unzipped. His eyes were wide with panic. He looked nothing like the confident businessman he usually presented to the world. He looked like a frightened boy who had lost his way. Seeing him like that nearly broke me. For a second, all I could see was the child I once carried on my hip, the teenager who used to ask me for advice, the young man who hugged me after graduating college. My heart tightened with love and grief at the same time. He demanded to know what I had done. I did not raise my voice. I did not move from my chair. I simply reminded him of the envelope, of the papers he had placed in front of me without hesitation, of the documents that told me I was disposable. I also told him about the forged signatures and the hidden loans. My words were calm, but each one carried years of disappointment. Ryan tried to explain himself. He spoke about pressure, about expectations, about trying to keep up with successful friends, about how Madeline wanted more than he could provide. He said he only meant to borrow money temporarily. He said he planned to fix everything later. He said he never meant to hurt me. Listening to him, I realized something painful. He truly believed excuses were enough. Somewhere along the way, I had taught him that I would always clean up his messes, that no mistake was too big for his mother to fix. That lesson had turned into entitlement. I looked at him and understood that if I saved him now, I would be condemning him to repeat this behavior forever. So I did the hardest thing I had ever done. I told him I would not undo what I had done. Not yet. I explained that consequences were not punishment. They were education. He needed to understand what it meant to risk other people's security. He needed to feel the weight of his choices. Only then could he grow. My voice shook, but my decision did not. Inside, a war was raging. Part of me wanted to stand up and hug him, to promise everything would be fine, to protect him from pain. That part had guided my life for decades. Another part remembered the humiliation, the betrayal, the camera pointed at my face, the legal papers that treated me like a stranger. That part demanded respect. Ryan's expression shifted from shock to frustration to despair. He accused me of being cruel. He said I was ruining his life. He said a real mother would never do this. Those words pierced deeply. But I did not retreat. Eventually, he turned away. He walked toward the door slowly, shoulders slumped. Before leaving, he looked back once, as if hoping I would change my mind. I did not. When the door closed, the house fell into silence. I remained in my chair, staring at the empty space where he had stood. Tears finally came. Not because I regretted my choice, because loving someone sometimes means letting them fall. If you're still watching and feeling the tension between love and consequences, please comment number 6 below to let me know you're with me. What happened after I stood my ground shocked even me. Now, let's move on to chapter 7. The weeks after Ryan walked out of my house passed slowly, as if time itself had grown heavy. Days blurred into one another, marked only by quiet mornings, long afternoons, and restless nights. We did not speak much. Sometimes several days passed without a single message. The silence between us felt louder than any argument we had ever had. I tried to focus on my routine. I watered my plants. I cleaned the house. I went for short walks along the river. I volunteered twice a week at the community clinic. On the surface, my life looked stable. Inside, however, I was constantly listening for news, for signs of how my son was surviving without my protection. They arrived sooner than I expected. A former coworker, whose husband worked in banking, mentioned that Ryan's accounts were under review. A neighbor told me she had seen moving trucks outside his apartment. Another acquaintance hinted that several of his business partners had withdrawn from joint projects. I never asked questions, but the information found its way to me anyway. Ryan's professional life was unraveling. Soon after, I learned about his marriage. Madeline had grown impatient with the financial restrictions. Without easy access to money, their lifestyle changed overnight. Arguments became frequent. Public smiles disappeared from her social media. Within weeks, she left. She moved out quietly, taking what she could and then leaving behind unpaid bills and broken promises. When I finally saw Ryan in person at a grocery store one afternoon, I barely recognized him. He had lost weight. His clothes looked worn. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. The confident posture he once carried was gone, replaced by slumped shoulders and hesitant movements. He avoided my gaze at first, as if ashamed. When our eyes finally met, I saw exhaustion and regret instead of anger. That image stayed with me for days. At home, I wrestled with my emotions. Some nights, I cried alone in my bedroom, wondering if I had gone too far. I replayed our childhood memories in my mind. His first steps, his first school play, his proud smile on graduation day. The urge to rescue him surged constantly. Other nights, I reminded myself why I had made my decision. I remembered the envelope, the forged signatures, the hidden loans, the cold calculation behind those choices. I reminded myself that love without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Ryan began reaching out more often. At first, his messages were short and cautious. He asked how I was. He apologized without excuses. Later, he admitted how overwhelmed he felt. He told me he had taken temporary work helping a contractor renovate houses. He said he was learning how difficult it was to survive without financial safety nets. I responded, but carefully. I did not ignore him. I did not reject him. But I did not offer money or shortcuts. I encouraged him to keep working. I reminded him to stay honest. I praised small efforts, nothing more. Slowly, changes appeared. He canceled unnecessary subscriptions. He sold his luxury car. He moved into a smaller apartment. He learned how to cook simple meals. He stopped trying to impress people who did not care about him. For the first time in years, he was living within his means. Watching this transformation was painful and hopeful at the same time. It hurt to see my child struggle, yet it comforted me to see him grow. One evening, he called and asked if we could talk in person. His voice was calm, respectful, different. I agreed. Something told me that a turning point was approaching. The morning I agreed to meet Ryan, I woke up earlier than usual. I lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of birds outside my window. My heart felt restless, caught somewhere between fear and fragile hope. Part of me worried that this meeting would reopen wounds I had worked so hard to close. Another part whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something better. We chose a small cafe near the Savannah River, a quiet place with wooden tables and large windows facing the water. It was neutral ground, far from the memories tied to my home. I arrived 10 minutes early and ordered tea, needing something warm to steady my hands. Ryan was already there. He sat alone at a corner table, leaning forward with his hands clasped. When he looked up and saw me, he stood immediately. His clothes were simple, no expensive watch, no designer jacket. His hair was neatly trimmed and his face looked thinner than before. Most importantly, his eyes no longer held arrogance. They held uncertainty and humility. We sat across from each other in silence for a moment. Then he began to speak. He apologized without hesitation. There were no excuses, no references to stress or pressure. He admitted that he had been selfish. He admitted that he had chosen convenience over conscience. He admitted that he had taken my love for granted. Hearing those words, spoken so plainly, loosened something tight inside my chest. I listened without interrupting. I studied his hands as they trembled slightly. I noticed how carefully he chose each sentence. I felt tears gathering in my eyes, but I blinked them away. This conversation was too important for weakness. When he finished, it was my turn. I told him how terrified I had been when I read those papers. how I had imagined myself packing boxes at 64, searching for somewhere to live, wondering how my own child could discard me so easily. I told him how humiliated I felt knowing I had been recorded without consent, how deeply it hurt to realize I had been excluded from decisions about my own home. He lowered his head as I spoke. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I simply told the truth. Then I explained my conditions. First, he would sign full ownership of the house back to me, permanently and legally. Second, he would repay every dollar connected to fraudulent transactions. Third, he would begin professional therapy to understand why he had made such choices. Fourth, he would become financially independent with no access to my accounts, credit, or assets. There would be no negotiations, no shortcuts, no emotional bargaining. Ryan looked stunned at first. He leaned back in his chair, processing everything. His brows furrowed, his lips tightened. For a moment, I wondered if he would walk away. Instead, he took a deep breath. He nodded slowly. He said he understood. He said he was tired of living dishonestly. He said he wanted to earn my trust instead of demanding it. That was the first time in years I truly believed him. We finished our drinks quietly. When we stood to leave, there was no dramatic embrace, no sudden reconciliation, just a calm understanding between two people willing to rebuild from the ruins. As I walked back toward my car, the river flowed beside me, steady and patient. For the first time in months, I felt hope without fear. If you're still watching and curious whether my son truly changed, please at comment number 8 below to let me know you're with me, because the ending of this journey might surprise you. Now let's move on to the final chapter. Time did not heal everything overnight. There were no sudden miracles after my conversation with Ryan at the cafe. Instead, change arrived slowly, quietly, through consistent effort and uncomfortable honesty. Weeks turned into months, and months gradually shaped a new reality for both of us. True to his word, Ryan began taking responsibility. Within the first month, he worked with a legal advisor to transfer full ownership of the house back to me. We signed the documents together at a small office downtown. As I watched him place his signature on those pages, I felt something settle inside me. It was not victory. It was closure. He also started repaying the money connected to the unauthorized loans. The amounts were small at first, limited by his modest income, but he never missed a payment. Every month, he sent me a detailed breakdown of his finances, not because I demanded it, but because he wanted to be transparent. That honesty mattered more than the money itself. Ryan committed to therapy. At first, he seemed uncomfortable talking about it. He admitted that admitting weakness had been difficult. Over time, however, he began sharing insights he had gained about insecurity, comparison, and fear of failure. Listening to him reflect so openly made me realize how lost he had been for years without knowing it. He moved into a small one-bedroom apartment across town. It was nothing like the spacious house he once took for granted. The furniture was basic. The walls were bare, but it was his. He paid the rent himself. He managed his utilities. He cooked simple meals. He learned to budget carefully. For the first time, he was fully responsible for his own survival. Our relationship shifted. We no longer discussed money. We no longer argued about boundaries. We spoke as two adults instead of a dependent child and an exhausted parent. He asked for advice occasionally, but he never expected solutions to be handed to him. When I offered help, it was accepted with gratitude, not entitlement. We began meeting regularly. Sometimes it was lunch on Sundays at a quiet diner. Sometimes it was a walk along the river. Sometimes it was coffee on my porch. Our conversations were calm and genuine. We talked about books, work, memories of his father, and even past mistakes without anger. I noticed changes in him. He listened more. He interrupted less. He said thank you often. He admitted when he was wrong. He took responsibility when things did not go as planned. He no longer chased appearances. He chased stability. As for me, I learned restraint. I resisted the urge to monitor his every move. I stopped offering unsolicited advice. I allowed him to struggle when necessary. I trusted the process instead of controlling it. My home felt peaceful again. I slept through the night. I laughed more easily. I stopped checking my phone obsessively. Anxiety loosened its grip on my chest. I felt safe in my own space, emotionally and physically. Sometimes, I sat on the porch and thought about how close I had come to losing everything, not just my house, my dignity, my voice, my sense of self. Choosing boundaries had saved all three. Looking at Ryan now, standing on his own feet, I knew I had made the right decision. The relationship we once had was gone, but what replaced it was stronger, healthier, and rooted in mutual respect. And with that realization came a desire to share what I had learned, because my story was never just about survival. It was about reclaiming my worth. These days, my mornings begin quietly. Sunlight filters through the curtains of my bedroom, and the soft sound of the river reaches my ears before any alarm ever could. I make my coffee slowly, sit on the porch, and breathe in the calm that once felt impossible. This house, with its creaking floors and familiar walls, is mine again in every sense. Not just legally, but emotionally. It is no longer a place of fear. It is a place of peace. After everything that happened, I made a promise to myself that I would not shrink back into survival mode. I joined a local senior wellness group. I started attending weekly yoga classes designed for older adults. I traveled with friends to Charleston and Asheville, places I had always postponed visiting because I thought my responsibilities came first. I learned that caring for myself was not selfish. It was necessary. Looking back, my journey feels unreal at times. I went from being a devoted wife to a grieving widow, from a struggling single mother to a hardworking provider, from a woman who trusted too easily to someone who learned to protect herself. Every stage of my life demanded strength I did not know I possessed until I needed it. For many years, I believed that being a good mother meant endless sacrifice. I believed love meant saying yes, even when it hurt. I believed endurance was proof of devotion. Those beliefs nearly cost me everything. Now I know better. Real love does not require erasing yourself. It does not demand silence in the face of disrespect. It does not grow from fear. Love needs boundaries to survive. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors with rules. They protect dignity. They teach accountability. They create space for healthy relationships to grow. Without them, affection turns into obligation, and generosity turns into exploitation. Learning that lesson changed my life. To every woman in her 50s, 60s, or beyond who believes it is too late to reclaim her voice, I want you to hear this clearly. It is never too late. You have the right to say no. You have the right to demand respect. You have the right to choose yourself without apology. Age does not erase worth. Experience does not weaken courage. If anything, time sharpens both. Ryan and I now share a relationship built on honesty. He lives independently, manages his finances responsibly, and approaches life with humility instead of entitlement. When he visits, he brings groceries, asks permission before making changes, and thanks me for small things I once took for granted. We talk openly about mistakes and growth. Our bond is quieter than before, but stronger. I do not regret my decision. Not once. I do not lie awake wondering if I should have handled things differently. I do not wish I had protected him from consequences. Those consequences saved him. They saved me too. This story was never about revenge. It was about awakening. It was about choosing self-respect over silent suffering. It was about learning that strength sometimes looks like stepping back instead of holding tighter. It was about understanding that kindness does not mean surrender. If you are listening to this and standing at the edge of a difficult choice, unsure whether you are strong enough to protect yourself, let me tell you something. You are. You have survived more than you realize. You deserve more than you accept. And you are capable of rebuilding your life with courage, clarity, and grace. My name is Evelyn Carter. And this is the story of how I learned to stand tall again. Life does not break us to make us smaller. It breaks us to show us what we are capable of rebuilding. Every painful ending carries the seed of a wiser beginning, if we are brave enough to face it. True strength is not found in endurance alone, but in knowing when to stand up for your own worth. Boundaries are not signs of coldness. They are acts of self-respect. When we choose dignity over fear, honesty over comfort, and courage over silence, we reclaim our power. Growth is rarely loud. It happens quietly, through difficult choices, lonely nights, and steady determination. In the end, healing is not about erasing the past, but about learning from it and walking forward with clarity. Thank you for listening and sharing this journey. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment, share your thoughts, and let others know they are not alone. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and stay connected for more real stories of strength and resilience.